Hi, welcome to this episode of the Wellbeing Show. I've got a great guest with me, Alan, who's joining us to talk about his experience with OCD and a book that he's just written about it. And I was saying to him just for the show, OCD of all the conditions I come across is the one that is completely misunderstood, totally most by everybody. It's so I'm really glad to have him on so we can dispel some myths and get to understand it. Before we start, just remember that this is a pre-recorded show, so don't call me during the middle of it because I might be doing something else and I might be upset if you do that. But do send me a message on my WhatsApp 07506 319 745 +44. Drop the first zero if you're messaging from outside of the UK, I think, or calling or sending messages. That's enough of me. Hi, Alan. How you doing?
I'm fine, thanks very much, Noel, and thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, that's a very nice Edinburgh accent I hear.
Thank you very much. It's still there somewhere. A
No, it is. It's quite strong. It's quite unique, the Edinburgh accent, isn't it?
little bit softer than Glasgow.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the accent below Corstorphine, I should say. It's definitely, once it gets above to Corstorphine onwards, it slightly changes a little bit. But there you go. I used to live in Edinburgh, as I said. You grew up there, though, didn't you?
I
Old Reed.
did. Yeah, I spent my first 23, 24 years there before I decided to set my sail for the big smoke.
Yeah. But Edinburgh's used to be called Old Reekie, didn't it?
It
Meaning,
is. In fact, yeah, I went from one smoke to another, really.
yeah,
It was because of all the smoke and smog. Well, not the smog, the smoke and the compactness of the city. It was all very, very messy. And only in the last kind of 50 years have they started cleaning buildings up and making them look a little bit more.
yeah.
Uh,
Even the buildings in Edinburgh are black when they should be white. I mean,
they should be sandstone. Yeah,
yeah, it's quite extraordinary, like the
it is.
on Princess Street. But it's nice to hear it's been cleaned up. Have they finally got the tram done yet?
Absolutely. Trams have been done and extended down to Leith now. In fact, yeah, because they were there in the 50s, and I'm not sure why they took them out, if I'm honest. But as always, in Scotland, we take on these big projects, and we they last for far too long, and they cost three times more than they should
Yeah.
do. But
I mean, way back when I was there, they were planning the trams, and I was there for 10 years and nothing happened. Also, I saw one track laid in that 10 years, and then along Princess Street, and that was it. So,
yeah, I think we've invented many things in Scotland, but we're not really very good project managers.
all the politics of it and all that sort of stuff. What was it like growing up in Edinburgh?
It was very black and white, really. I think I look back at all my old photographs, and it not only were they in black and white, it was kind of black and white, really. There wasn't a lot of, it seemed, color around, but it was, I found growing, I was born late 50s, and I found it, yeah, a strange upbringing. Strange in that, well, I only know one upbringing, but it seemed quite uncommunicative, very archetypally Northern Scottish stoic. We don't cry, we don't do this. It's all and very much my parents were of the war years. So in retrospect, it was a rather kind of uninformed time,
Yeah.
really. And I went to an all boys school until I was 16 when I left, and then I went on to university and stayed in Edinburgh, which was I didn't have my best time there. I had some challenges when I went on to study.
Yeah.
I did things in retrospect far too early when I was not mature enough to do it, and it caused me later angst, which I'll come on to later.
Sure. Sure. What
Um,
did you go to Edinburgh University?
no, I went to Heriot Watt,
Okay, yeah, yeah.
which is an engineering university, which I thought I was in tune with, and it seemed exciting as a course. But when I got into it, I thought I don't think I was mature enough or focused enough to want to do it. And I think it was more picking a course that looked interesting out of the book. I had to pick one of the more challenging ones,
Yeah.
uh, probably because oil was big in those times in the 70s. It was the chemicals industry was big then. But when I graduated in 1980, there was the first huge recession. So
Hmm.
I found myself being employed in a completely different industry in London just to leave Edinburgh, really, which I thought was very boring.
Yeah.
In respect, I think I couldn't afford to live there now, probably. But
I'd certainly change. I mean, people don't understand the impact of the oil on industry on Scotland, certainly.
oh yeah, and it, and
Yeah,
it
I mean, like Dundee and places like that were essentially outcroppings of the oil industry, and people would
that's it.
live for months
Yeah,
away, make tons of money, come back, and then cane loads of drugs. So, like, it's quite insane, really.
yeah. But I kind of escaped from boring old Edinburgh, which I regret ever saying that now because that's actually a fantastic place. And I still go back there to recharge my batteries. There is nowhere else where I can go where I can get my batteries back up to 100% than walking down my well-kept streets up there.
Yeah, I mean, Edinburgh, I remember it as an extraordinary experience. I mean, I think it is one of the most unique cities I've ever
Mm,
lived in, to be honest. That mix of something going right back to medieval times,
yeah.
the new town, etc., etc., and but the vibe of the place, it's almost I had a sense like it wasn't quite real somehow.
Yeah. The way I think about it, Noel, is that I can go back now and walk along the same streets that look the same. And I had short trousers on, I had long trousers, I had flares, I had, whatever kind of dress I wore, the surroundings mainly didn't change.
Yeah,
And that is actually quite a grounding and comforting thing to have to go back to.
yeah.
In this world where we have the blogosphere, the internet, and so many different communications around us, it's nice to go home and find things haven't changed.
Yeah,
You're
I mean,
kind of grounded.
that's one of the things I think that makes it unique is there is so much protected architecture, for example, around
Mm.
the city centre. Not so much outside, but the new town will never be redeveloped because it can't. It's so protected. The
Oh,
medieval town, of course, can't. Who's going to build a tower block on top of the castle? Nobody. Do you know what I mean? So there's all that sort of stuff, which is makes it rock solid, and I think
it's
gives it that sense of permanence.
absolutely, absolutely.
Is so. I think you're right. You capture it very well. It is reassuring to know there are places like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I attribute the same to the center of London sometimes because
Yeah.
when I moved down to London, and the very, very center of London, the kind of when I moved down there, I went everywhere by bus because you learn nothing in the tube
Yeah.
except that it isn't geographically correct.
Yeah.
But I found myself just getting very familiar, as I did in my hometown. I tried to kind of overlay the same thing upon my territory in the center of London to kind
Yeah.
of give myself a new area of comfort.
Did you have siblings as well? Yeah. But
I have
with
a brother who's still in Edinburgh, in fact. Yeah, he lives just behind Murrayfield Stadium.
okay. And did he go into university as well, or did you
No,
choose?
he didn't. He did. He left school and went into the insurance business, and then he worked with the Scotsman
Yeah.
newspaper, and yeah, so he took a
Course, that's
different
the
path.
other classic industry in Scotland, isn't it? That
Yeah,
post-industrial, you've got finances, you've got the oil industry, etc., and also intellectual industries. So it's a powerhouse of thinking.
yeah. I
Um,
think Dundee itself, of course, was known for jam
yeah,
because of the raspberries that are grown around there. Jute, which was used for making linoleum, and journalism, where
yeah,
DC Thompson kind of made their comic home, and also it's turned into a games industry now. So it's very much about a renaissance in Scotland of the gaming industry and very ultra modern.
yeah. But you sort of felt itchy around being in Edinburgh and wanted to get out. On
Yeah,
reflection, what do you think that was?
I think I was searching around for somewhere to. I got a lot of pressure from my father to follow into the course I did, which was chemical engineering, chemical and process engineering. And it was, if you could have picked a challenging engineering course, that was the one.
Yeah,
And but I had some failures in that I resat a year, which was embarrassing and probably uncovered my lack of maturity in being able to focus on doing the studying. I finished eventually, but it left a mark on me, which comes back in dream stuff every now and again.
Hmm.
lack of performance and dropping the ball. It kind of has been an influential part. But my dad was quite insistent when I decided to move to a non a company which wasn't related to my industry, to my studies. He thought I was making the biggest mistake of my life.
Right.
He himself had come through. He was a draftsman for 30 years. He and his dad were in the shipbuilding industry in Leith. So he and my mum were they both worked, but they weren't aware of business. They hadn't traveled very far. So I didn't get much enrichment from them in terms of the world beyond Morningside,
Yeah.
literally. And so therefore he just thought I was making a big mistake. And he piled a lot of he didn't know it, but he piled a lot of pressure onto me that kind of made its mark and it kind of manifested itself later in life.
Right. Right. And so the industry you went into was, just to be clear?
It was telecommunications.
Okay.
And then within a year, I'd left there and gone into a petrochem company in Euston in London
All right.
because I wanted to show to him that I was trying to get into that industry.
Okay.
Actually, I didn't do chemical engineering. I did scheduling and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But I obviously felt this inbuilt thing to please my dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd let him down somehow. So I kind of forced myself into there. And then after a couple of years, I went to another engineering company where yet again, I stayed there for 20 years where I was in around chemical engineers, but not being one.
Yeah. And again,
It,
do you think that was to try and please your father?
yeah, it was I didn't realize it then, but in the end, it came right. But I was able to work in those businesses without actually doing the thing that I'd studied. And you don't need to. We know that now.
Yeah.
But back in the 70s, it was like, he's messed up. I don't understand what he's doing here.
Hmm.
So he was trying to give me some parental guidance, probably, but he didn't really know enough about it to know whether I was making a well-informed or a poor decision in retrospect.
But it's also, and I think there's something maybe about men's journeys here, what it is to be a man and what it is to be a father, what it is to be a son. Because those things have changed significantly. I mean, sort of like my father, for example, when he caught me peeling potatoes once, was genuinely deeply shocked that I was preparing food. And I was genuinely deeply shocked he didn't understand that if I was hungry, I was going to make myself something to eat. I mean, it was like alien worlds, right? It was sort of like
Yeah.
he just didn't get it. Um,
Yeah, I think I don't think I had that kind of upbringing, but I did think the word love wasn't used very much unless it's in a song. I'm not saying love wasn't around, if you'll pardon the musical pun there, but certainly it wasn't conveyed regularly, such as it is now. It's almost cast away at the end of a text now, isn't it? It's almost
yeah,
like saying
yeah,
"I love you." It's kind
yeah,
of almost become a bit of a grammar,
yeah.
a bit of grammar, really. So I think then though it was you had to dig for compliments. You had just got on with it, really. That's
Was
all
that
I
specific to your family culture? Was that specific to Scottish culture? Was that male culture in general?
general,
Right.
very general. I noticed the difference when I came south and found there was generally a more openness and more emotion in people's language in the south than there was at north. It was less kind of I don't
Yeah,
quite
yeah.
know.
No, I do know what you mean because I live there, so I get it
Yeah,
totally.
yeah, and it's I look back now and I look at it's been rather kind of backward in some of the people I know and what they say at home, and it's usually the people who haven't traveled very far.
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting that there is still that sense, but also London itself is a very much cosmopolitan
Mm.
mix of people, and you have to learn to have a broad mind and openness. Otherwise, you don't survive in London, I think, you know.
Now, I actually found it quite a lonely place in
Did
the
you?
yeah. At first I found it very difficult. It's so big as to be unmanageable in terms of making close contact. So I tended to um, go with work colleagues and go places.
Okay.
Uh, but yeah, so I think I thought it was difficult to make friends and get partnered up in London.
Yeah. Did you get a family yourself, or did that not come?
No, I actually met my first wife. We were working in the same company.
Yeah.
So actually probably within a couple of years of being in my first job. I'd already met the person who would become my wife,
Yeah.
and we had two daughters together. And yeah, so that's how life started in the south.
Right.
With and she was from Glasgow, so I had some Celtic connection there to play with.
She thought you was a weakling in comparison to her fellow Weegies. From Edinburgh, you might as well be from England as far as Glaswegians are concerned.
Absolutely. My dad once said, "You're going to Glasgow? Why?" And he was serious.
Yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
got that we haven't got.
I know, I know. And people should know. So people don't know. Literally, Glasgow and Edinburgh are a spitting distance apart. Drew.
Certainly,
I mean, it's like it's 20 minutes on the train max, right?
absolutely.
So I mean, they're at the narrowest part of Scotland. So if you look at Scotland, that really narrow bit, Edinburgh's there and Glasgow's there. So I mean, it's like it is so funny the competition and the
Yeah.
difference between two, but they are very different places as well.
They
It
are
has to
very
be said.
different. One's manufacturing and one's very much non-manufacturing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, so you struggled a bit, but you did what was expected of you, I guess. You settled down, you got a job, you got a family, and all that sort of stuff. What was going on in terms of this sort of OCD stuff? I mean, was that there in the background? Did that emerge at some point? What was happening with that?
No, that didn't come out until much later, probably until I was in my mid 40s to early 50s.
Okay.
Um, I remember my mum used to, when we went on holiday for a couple of weeks, she would go and she'd go off, 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 which is the four gas taps.
Yeah.
And I can remember her doing that. But I hasten to say that I wouldn't say that's where I learned it.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the I found in many of my sojourns with professional people in psychiatry that no one really wants to know where OCD comes from or how it starts. They're more really focused on trying to work out how to deal with it. But I'm quite intrigued about where it all comes from. And when I did some CBT therapy, um, I kind of replicated some of their diagrams where you look at feelings and emotions and try
Yeah.
to map it all. And I thought, well, I'm going to try and work out where did this particular OCD routine I do start. And in most cases, I could identify it to something that happened to me. And I've realized that we'll talk about OCD in a little bit, but I I develop hotspots, things that become an obsession. Everyone has different obsessions. There are lots of different subtypes of OCD, but I kind of like grew them. I kind of found one here, and once you find it, it's very difficult to get rid of it. Whether it's checking doors or checking taps, or I had lots of other ones, but you kind of build them up, and they grow and grow and grow and become more impactful.
Yeah. So we can just continue talking about OCD now. It's fine.
Yeah,
Because it's interesting that it came to you later in life. So you've got your partner and your kids, they know you as one person, and then this thing slowly emerges, or it came overnight. What was the experience?
I think it probably didn't come into its strongest or most impactful until I got divorced in 2005 from my first wife, and it was probably after that point where I was living on my own for a while. I think probably some of my worries about being on my own
Yeah,
manifested themselves, and I think the OCD or whatever predisposition I had, my brain kind of hooked onto this, and it became more kind of impactful then because I felt a little bit exposed financially, personally, relationship wise. I was moving up the chain in work, having more responsibility, and suddenly I really I think that's where most of the things that are today still my challenges they bedded in then. I think it was a bit of PTSD, if you like,
yeah,
from a change of lifestyle. My wife and I mutually left each other, but there was still I kind of felt loneliness that wasn't obvious.
yeah.
You wouldn't have known it, but in retrospect, I felt the pressure of being deciding everything myself.
Okay, okay.
Makes
And so
sense.
that fear of loneliness, the sense of loneliness, produce what, some anxiety or fear?
Anxiety, yes. This is where I really have to talk about OCD,
Go.
and its lack of understanding is an understatement here.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I've thought through this many times. People do think of OCD being cleanliness and order,
Yeah.
symmetry. Well, who doesn't prefer symmetry? We taught how to write at school, where we have spaces in between. People like to be tidy. It's a preference. However, if you have symmetry OCD or contamination cleanliness OCD,
Yeah.
you have a compulsion to do something to relieve a pressure that if you don't do, there will be a consequence.
Mm.
And I've known people far worse than me, and talk to them online, and somebody might say, well, I have to get into this room in the morning, I have to go in a certain route and do things, I have to have something in a certain order. If I don't do that, I can't leave here because I feel somebody in my family may die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something catastrophic, illogical perhaps, but catastrophic will happen. And that's the huge gap between the perception of OCD as being, oh, he's tight. Lucky you, he's got OCD. Oh, he'll be tidy around the house then. What a great guy to have. Not like that at all, I'm afraid.
Mhm.
Not a bit like that. And I think we talked earlier about the perception of OCD here. And you do have people say, I'm a little bit OCD.
Yeah.
You never hear people say I'm a little bit bipolar or a little bit anorexic.
Yeah.
It's because they think they are serious illnesses, so they wouldn't dare compromise them or belittle them. But OCD clearly doesn't have the same kind of image. Otherwise, people wouldn't
Yeah.
say it.
I'm not sure what people's motivations are, whether they don't take it seriously or not, but I think there's a lack of information, definitely. Whereas I would say something like bipolar, people do have a bit more information about it. And as you say, understand that it can have devastating consequences on people's lives. And I think where the lack of understanding is, not understanding that OCD similarly can have devastating consequences on people's lives. So
Mm,
when you get OCD as a child, not so much now, I hope, but certainly let's say 15 or 20 years ago, a child with severe OCD would have been placed in a psych ward and would have had a dreadful
yes.
time and would have had more problems from that hospitalization than from their original condition. Would have definitely developed post-traumatic stress disorder, would have experienced pin down and lockdown, because even professionals didn't understand the nature
No.
of OCD. And people thought of it just in many ways as simply an extreme form of anxiety disorder. If you were to try and sort of say what is OCD in some sort of straightforward terms for people,
Mm.
I'm guessing you have because you've thought about it, right?
Yeah, a very simple one. I have a specific tap in the house which I focus on,
Yeah.
it's a kind of push top tap where you lift it up, push down.
Yeah.
If I'm going to, I worry that I'll leave it on. It'll flood the house. It'll cost a fortune. We'll lose all these possessions. I'll look stupid because I've done something really silly. So I'll go through routines of pressing it up and down 5 times and then 5 times more. I'll go through maybe 5 iterations of five.
Yeah.
I'll then put my hand underneath the water to check whether it's dripping or not. And I may repeat that a lot, depending how anxious I am. I could repeat that until I'm satisfied that I've done enough to leave it. That's a simple one. I'll then go to the front door and do the same with the front door, pushing it to check that it's not open. I may even put my fingers round the side of the grip, the insulation to so that I can see the indentation on my fingers, so that when I walk away, no, I can see the indentation, which means I've tested it
Yeah.
and I've got proof that I checked that door. I then get in my car and I go only 200 yards or so along the village road and I come to the primary school and I'm really worried about knocking a small child over. So I'll be really slow. It could be 7:30 in the morning. There
Mm.
could be no kids there. If I'm in the least distracted, I'll probably go back, reverse out, come right round again, and go really slowly past there to check that I haven't done something wrong, that I haven't missed something.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to come home that night and find out a sign which says, "Did you see an accident here?"
Mm.
And I get home and my wife says, "Did you see what happened this morning? Someone drove off and ran over a small child." And then I see the blue lights coming and they knock on my door and they find out, "Were you driving this morning?" And they check my car and I'm in jail and I'm disowned. And this catastrophe balloons in my head. The
Yeah.
first The second time I go past that school, I don't see that. It's just a little shortcut on my desktop go bing. And the feeling in here is that you got to be very careful here. Something really bad's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't physically go through that scenario. And that's how I would, that's that last example is something I think that most people who think they know about OCD would not understand and might be shocked at how lightly they think of it. Because on occasions I've got out of the car and looked underneath just to check there's not a body there. That is extreme.
Yeah.
If I don't do that, I'll worry all day about it.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
have no choice.
Yeah.
So I'm only 10 minutes out the house and there's taps, front door, school.
Mhm. So coming back, because you mentioned earlier on, that's a very sort of helpful description. And these rituals, is what they're called,
Yeah.
they have to be done in a very precise way, or they don't have work. But also they may have to be repeated a lot of times, depending on whether your anxious background noise
Yeah.
anyway. So
Yeah.
if life is stressful, like it is for a lot of us at times, and one's stress levels are up because of that, then the rituals need to be done again and again and again, much more to try and manage what is normal life stress, right?
Yeah. I mean, some people have very specific ones. It could be something like vomiting,
Yeah,
fear of vomiting. Other people it could be contamination. I had 15 of them basically that I gathered over the years, which hit me in different, at work, driving to work, in the house, and they just plagued me. And the thing is, the more I read about it when I kind of started dealing with it, the more I actually soaked up more information about OCD, which fed my brain with more information on which to do bad things in my head.
yeah,
So I found that too much information was not good for me.
yeah, yeah, because that just feeds fantasies, right?
Correct.
So when did, I guess my question is this, because these things, they don't just come overnight. It's not like you wake up one day and you suddenly got 15 rituals to do. They sort of come slowly over time, except for some people. Some people have very extreme examples that it is like that. But because of maybe a traumatic incident, I'm going to come back to those types of things. But uh, these would have built up over time. And initially, probably people had noticed they would just, it would have been slightly amusing. Oh, look, Alan's having to open and close the door again, whatever. It wasn't a big deal. But this stuff inside your head is, you've got this catastrophic thinking. Um, and at what point did you realize, or did somebody else realize, this is a problem? This is not silly. This is a problem. When did that tipping point come?
That's the intriguing thing, though, because for 25 years that it affected me, I didn't reveal it to anybody.
Because,
You wouldn't have seen it
yeah,
because, well, I found out, for instance, during COVID, I had some online meetings with people with OCD, and I noticed something very intriguing. Everybody met each other every 2 weeks and they had great conversations. They never talked to anybody else. I talked to my wife about it. I was writing poetry about it. Wow, they thought that was strange. And I think that the whole thing is here, no, is that over here you have people who they know people don't understand OCD and it is irrational and illogical. So they don't tell anybody. And over here you have society who thinks it's all about preferring to be clean and tidy and it's nothing bad at all. And they are so diversely apart. These people will never come into the middle here because society doesn't understand it. And
yeah.
the less society understands it, the more they will stay in their closeted area, not putting their hands up.
Now, did you hide yours on purpose, or was it just a case of this is how I do my life? It wasn't something you noticed.
It was on purpose. Mostly, I even hid it from my. I'm now married again. My second wife. She knew I had it eventually, and then when I decided I was going to deal with it, I said I'm going to talk to the doctor about all the rituals I've got, and she said to me, "What do you mean all of them?"
Yes, it's like you listed them. It's like,
And then I said, and oh." that was a bit of a shock. So if I didn't tell my wife, I certainly didn't tell anybody at work. The people that I work with would never have known.
Could you say why you hid them?
Oh, embarrassment, ashamed
About what, though?
about being thought to be controlled by something illogical. That if I'm at work, how can I be trusted to do my job when I can't shut my front door?
Yeah. And now, obviously, you understand that that embarrassment and shame is just part of the condition, right? So it's really
Absolutely.
important that people understand this, that the
Yeah.
person with the condition will be doing exactly what Alan says, which is somehow trying to put it to one side, knowing that something strange is going on, but hiding it away. As a mental health professional, I would just say to people this one truth and fact: the sooner you notice that there's something wrong with you, and the sooner you get help, the better it is. I mean, it's obvious to people, isn't it? It's obvious to people. But when you have a condition like Alan's, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong, which tells you to hide it, then by the time you're looking for help, whether it works or not, it's become incredibly chronic and complex and difficult, right?
It is. In fact, I can tell you exactly when I found out that I had OCD. And it wasn't a doctor. I was a director in the business I worked in, and we had a management meeting, and they had an initiative for mental health, and they showed this cartoon of somebody with OCD, and I am blushing beyond belief. My neck is red, and I'm thinking, I'm not going to engage with anybody
Me,
here because
that's
they're
me. Oh
going to
no.
say that is me. Nobody noticed at all. And I
Oh,
went to my hotel room that night and I Googled it.
yeah.
And this is what I've got. And then I Googled OCD ritual car.
Yes.
And I found there's a guy who drives like I do, and is someone who's told their partner, I'm convinced I've knocked somebody over. I've got to go and check.
Yeah.
And I thought, I've got something that someone else has got.
Yeah. Now I'm
And
going to
then I suddenly realized I had something specific.
Yeah. I want to try and be evocative for people because the terminology you're using is like, I think I've driven somebody over. For the person with OCD, it's not a thought, it's a fact, isn't it? Because
It
in
is.
your mind, as somebody with an OCD, we were talking about this before. Current research around OCD suggests that it's closer to the sort of psychotic functioning. And the way a psychotic brain works is that what's happening inside is real and what's happening outside is not so real. So when somebody sees something in their mind who has this sort of breakdown of the distinction between real and not real, i.e., inside my head, not real, out there, real, then what they see is the body under the car. It's not a thought. I am seeing the body under the car. I have run it over. That's what happens, right?
Yeah, and if I look in my mirror, having passed, see, I'm driving past a small child on a bike, and then I drive past it, then I look in my mirror and don't see it anymore. My first thought isn't they've gone into their house.
Yeah.
It's they've been taken into their house because I knocked them down. They're phoning an ambulance.
And you can see all this, can't you? This film
Absolutely,
plays out,
and I
right?
can't leave there because if I leave, I've left the scene of a crime.
Yeah. And it's
I can't win. I can't
and people
win.
need to understand just how factual and real it is inside the brain of somebody who is OCD, right? It's not a thought that you can look at rationally. And so these rituals, they help you manage that image.
They
That
do. They do to a point, Noel. But the whole thing about not telling anyone is imagine what you would do, tell your boss if you explained what I just explained to you.
it's like,
You might say that's very interesting, and that's thank you for telling me. What's he going to think when he leaves you?
yeah,
Are you is Alan a safe pair of hands?
yeah,
How can he do his job and have all that go? Oh, gee. And once someone knows something, they can't unknow it about you.
yeah. But of course, people with OCD can have very successful lives, but they
Absolutely
can also have but they are distressed and suffering immensely.
correct. And
And it's so upsetting, right?
I always said I deserved an equity card for the company
Yeah.
because, but I mean, I eventually did break it because when I retired, no. I knew I was retiring in 2020, just before COVID. Well, I didn't know COVID was coming, obviously. And I decided that I had to do something about this. I had to do a bungee jump, I think you might call it. I decided I couldn't leave because I had joined in with the mental health program and become a first aider,
Yeah.
and they were really quite progressive. I'm an OCD guy. I'm on the management team. We're launching this. I'm a first aider. We've got 64 guys all trained up, and I'm just going to leave and see absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So I didn't. I went in and I got 50 minutes to talk to the team before I left. And this is 40 people in the management team, my boss, directors. And I led them through a story of my starting with the company from the culture, enjoying it, and blah, blah. And I took them on this little journey.
Yeah.
And then I said, and the day I told my boss that I was leaving, I left the office that day feeling quite, I don't know, quite not sure how I was going to leave this place. I was quite mellow and
Yeah.
something was bugging me. And it wasn't until I got home and looked in the mirror, and this is how I said it, is I realized when I look in the mirror, guys, I don't see the person that you see.
Yeah.
You see me standing here confident,
Yeah.
presenting this stuff to you, but actually, I lack self-confidence. I have no self-belief. I have these rituals I do that cause me anxiety. And I didn't tell you because I'm embarrassed and ashamed. And people like me just, they hide it because you might think I can't do my job properly. So I'm sorry to tell you, but I'm not doing it anymore. I'm stepping out. This mask is off, and I really don't mind who knows about it.
Good. Good. And you certainly don't mind.
I don't mind.
But did you go in just, I mean, just aware of time, we don't have a huge amount of time, unfortunately. We might come back to this conversation. But I just want to thank you, first of all, for being very upfront and very honest. I know that's a real challenge to, particularly, I'm sure you may have some rituals to get through after this show, you poor thing.
Oh, I
Feeling
won't.
this exposed, I really send you a hug, okay? So did you at any point, once you realize this is a problem, you go and see a doctor and then you try and get some sort of help? Can you tell us about that process?
Yeah, I eventually, I kind of, I was overnight in a hotel one time with work, and I was up all night worrying about something quite insignificant. And I woke up in the morning with a head full of cotton wool, and I thought, this is it. I've reached my barrel has now overflowed. I'm going to see a doctor. I'm not incompetent. I'm ill.
Yeah,
And I did see a doctor, and they confirmed pretty well that I had OCD.
yeah,
After which I went into CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, which I'm not sure helped very much. But I was happy with the diagnosis, but I didn't. It took a long time to do anything meaningful with it.
yeah,
I saw a psychologist, psychiatrist, and a psychologist. I've eventually, over the last 4 years, and now ended up in hypnotherapy, which I found very helpful.
yeah, yeah.
Very helpful.
I can see why, actually, to be honest.
Because it helped me deal with things. Because my OCD, I now think it's part of me. The way I deal with this, it's not. I'm not ill. OCD is in my DNA somehow. I choose to think that I'm not
Yeah,
professional, and
yeah,
that helps me deal with it because I distracting myself helps me with my OCD. Like when we are finished this podcast, I am going for a beer. I go for a beer on a Thursday night. It's my own time, and I write. I journal every Thursday night, and it's my safe space. And I will write about
right.
anything I want to write about that day. But I have that control and governance over my OCD now, purely because I distract my brain. I
Okay.
send it on a different path.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get that. So the sort of treatments that you received weren't that useful. Did they, what sort of range, just again, for information for people, what sort of range of treatments did you try in the end?
I tried. I saw a psychologist who one of the most helpful things he did was get me to try and imagine with my worries. I'm sitting in a cinema,
Yeah,
and I can see on this huge screen, all my emotions in front of me.
yeah,
Not sitting in the front row. I'm sitting 10 rows back,
yeah,
onlooking. And I guess I did try and do that a lot. It's a way of distancing yourself from the emotion and the thought. and try to separate reality from this fog of whatever you want to call it, emotion that comes around it,
Yeah.
trying to install some governance. And I think, sorry, that's my
All right.
watch.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine.
Eventually, I did use a bit of, I, I used probably what you might call aversion therapy to try and stop me doing some of my
Yeah,
driving stuff. I
yeah,
would drive through it and I'd let it run in my head. I'd
yeah.
tell my wife, oh, I had a terrible drive home. And then I'd calm down. And then if I repeated that, I found that I reduced the level of anxiety by becoming more tolerant to my own
I mean, that's
anxiety.
a standard
Yeah,
treatment, the aversion work. We would call it exposure, prolonged
yeah,
exposure therapy.
but
So a little bit of CBT, a little bit of cognitive work helped you. That sort of, it's almost mindful, that trick, isn't it? About sit
it
back
is.
and view it rather than be in it.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
sort of like a mindful experience, which is, clever trick and trying to get your executive functioning going. Some of
Yeah,
that distress tolerance,
yeah.
again, that's a standard technique. So you found that for some. Any other stuff that you've done?
Well, I did some hypnotherapy, which helped me with dealing with anxiety issues that were
Yeah,
not really OCD. The thing which helped me repair was when I started writing poetry.
really? Wow.
During the COVID, I had this. I didn't have contamination issues at all. They were not one of my subtypes. I acquired that thank you to COVID.
That's
And
cool.
I wouldn't say I have four grandkids, and I didn't really want to be around kids because if I foolishly gave them COVID, even though it was unlikely, I would be bad granddad. I would be in the dock. So I didn't see my grandkids if I could possibly help it. And I had two granddaughters then who from my first marriage, and I started writing poetry for the older one, fantasy poems about them being superheroes going around the world helping babies get to sleep, and it was all rhyming stuff, and we did four or five of them, and then eventually that ran its course, and I was kind of depressed after that,
Yeah,
and my wife said to me, "Have you ever thought of writing poetry about how you feel?"
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And she
Brilliant.
went out for a 2 hour walk, came back. I said, "There you go, five verses." It came out of my brain. It like dripped out like a tap. It was
A tap
evocative.
you didn't have to ritualize. You could just let it be.
I didn't check that one. Thank you, Noah, for pointing that one out.
That's
Yeah, it just
super.
came out, came out in figurative language about me being down a hole. And I
Right.
suddenly realized when I came back up out of this hole that my wife was there. And I realized she's the one that's suffering just looking on.
Yeah.
She's worried about me. And that was when I wrote 50 poems over the next 18 months.
Brilliant.
And then I wrote poems about the time I told people at work and about
Yeah.
other things. And the journaling started, obsessively journaling, funnily enough. And then by 18 months later, I was telling people about these poems. They were saying, That one really resonates with me."
Yeah.
And then 3 years later, I had to do something with all these bits of paper under my arm, and it became a book. And that book was published. I self-published or hybrid published it in 2024, and I really felt that was perhaps one of the most constructive things I did
Brilliant.
to help me deal with my own challenges.
And I have to say that, as the field is emerging, that idea of turning it into a creative product absolutely makes sense. Absolutely. It's also, I think it would be interesting to look at this psychologically, how the brain works constructing poetry, because it's a very specific form, and the connections that it's making are very interesting, I think, to be
It's
honest.
also I did a little bits of poetry when I was very young,
Well, okay.
and I was very musical. I was very young,
Yeah.
and so I feel I've kind of found the skills that I didn't use at university.
Right.
Going full circle here.
Yeah.
I really wasn't programmed to do that stuff. I was programmed to be creative,
Yeah.
but it was suppressed because I had to have a living and earn money. So that I spent the most of my life not being me, if you like.
And you said that you got some insights from the CBT in particular into connections between what you think events or
Yeah, yeah.
experiences in life and then expressions of OCD.
Absolutely. I kind of took I think it was called a hot cross bun diagram in
Yeah,
CBT, I just did a little spreadsheet as I would do. And
yeah,
then I'm going to put a column on the end here, right? Where did each one start? And I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I could identify why they started, but I can't stop them starting.
yes,
And so it didn't really help a lot. It just says, oh, like I knew that when I retired and went into COVID, I've picked up contamination now.
yeah,
Duh. I'm susceptible to OCD. So it's with me. It's a bit like Japanese knotweed. It's kind of
yeah,
pernicious. I've got to find a way of dealing with it myself.
yeah.
And my creativity, I've kind of rebranded myself as a writer now. I'm not really a writer. I've written one book, but I
I
write
think that
as my
makes you a writer, Alan.
I don't, well,
You know
yeah.
what I'm saying? I think that does qualify you as a writer, mate.
But I just get so
How
much.
many books makes a writer? Oh, you know.
I get a dopamine. I used to run as well, and I get a bigger fix of dopamine from thinking about what I'm going to write than I do
Yeah, no,
from,
I get that. I get that.
and
And
it's
there's
addictive.
been, quite a lot of research into mental health, mental illness, and creativity. And there are some crass connections that people make. And I remember one of the most instructive things, this was in Edinburgh, at the Royal Edinburgh Hospital, where I started my practice after I qualified 30 plus years ago. I don't want to say exactly how long, because I'll have to admit just how old I am. And I'm not doing that ever. But Edinburgh, Royal Edinburgh was a teaching hospital. So it had a big tower in the middle of it where all the lectures were and all this sort of stuff. And I remember this amazing, she was a psychiatrist who came in to give a lecture specifically about creativity and mental health. And she'd done some research on whether or not specific forms of arts, writing or theatre or etc., would attract specific types of mental illnesses. It was a really interesting piece of research. And she said, no, it wasn't like that. But you would find that people who were managing long-term chronic conditions, such as OCD, would fit better into one art form than another because of it. So, for example, Spike Milligan, who had bipolar, was eventually couldn't do the performance bit of things because when he was down, he couldn't do anything, but he could still write because he didn't have to show up on stage. He didn't have to show up at the recording, and he could manage his condition and be creative. And that creativity kept him connected. And she then said something really interesting. She said, and currently I'm on medication for my bipolar. And I just want to say that it works for me. This research works for me. Creativity works for me. And she just wanted to say that, you know, you can have all sorts of conditions that don't necessarily have to destroy you.
No,
And you can be really successful as a human being. You can be Alan Sowersby, who's an extraordinary writer and advocate and talk. I mean, who knew, right, Alan?
well, I almost think
Repressed
that
Glasgow,
Edinburgh,
this repressed Edinburgh boy.
it's true. I think actually, I now say to myself, but for that OCD, I might not be doing what I'm doing now.
I think, yeah, that's a super way of saying it.
And that puts it, I just think of myself, this is the real me, really. Now,
Yeah,
I'm in my natural form now. There's no mask needed anymore.
yeah,
I don't need to impress anybody with anything.
yeah.
I just need to be myself. And I play a bit of piano. The keyboard's down here. I write. Like a pig in poo.
Brilliant. What's the name of the book?
It's called Breaking My Silence.
Great. And where can people find it?
It's on Amazon. It's on Kindle and it's in paperback. So
Do you have a website as well where people might be able to get a hold
I
of you?
don't have a website. I don't have a
Okay.
website, but it's easy to find if you just Google. I've not got the most common surname in the world, so if you put in Amazon Sowersby Breaking, you'll find me.
So tell me the title again so it goes in people's heads.
Breaking My Silence.
Brilliant. Look, Alan, it's been super to have you on. Thank you so much. It really is wonderful that to
I've
see.
enjoyed it. Thank you very much for asking me, and I've
Oh,
enjoyed
well,
my
look,
time speaking to you.
it's one of those conditions that is so misunderstood, partly because the person who's got it knows that they can't tell anybody about it because they're embarrassed and ashamed of it. But I'm glad you're here to encourage people. If you're listening to this, folks, and like you're having that moment that Alan had when he saw the cartoon of the OCD person at work, and you're thinking, look, seriously, go and talk to somebody about it. Don't live in anxiety and fear and shame and embarrassment about this stuff. It's so important. Are there any sort of online groups or support groups that you're part of that you would point people at?
I would say OCD UK is
Yeah.
one. I also do a lot of posting on LinkedIn. Yeah, I've maintained all the kind of connections I had for business. I've now
Great.
become my feed for men's stuff or mental health stuff or OCD stuff. So I've
Great.
become a little kind of self-appointed advocate, as you kindly put it.
Well, I mean, I think that is the transformation, isn't it? You
It
go from
is.
being terrified and hiding it and ashamed of it to hang on a minute. No,
Yeah,
let's change the world.
absolutely.
Damn good. Good job. Well done. You stay there, young man. I hope, folks, you got as much from that as I have. Go and buy Alan's book. Maybe go and follow him on LinkedIn as well. Say hi. And particularly if you're a HR or a manager in a company, get him in to have a chat with your staff, and that would be fantastic work. You stay there, Alan. Lots of love to you all. Hope you have a great evening after the show. And I'll see you at the next episode of the Wellbeing Show. Thank you very much.